Alison, Trina, welcome. Thank you for being here. First of all, could I just ask you to tell us a little bit about you, who you are and your backgrounds? So Trina, maybe to start with.
Yeah, so I'm Trina Robson. I've done many things over a number of years. Was a foster parent when I was very young. Worked in residential care with children. I was a social worker in a local child protection team, which is where I met Alison for a number of years. And then I worked for the NSPCC, again in child protection. And then went to work for the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. And that's where I was when we came up with the idea for Barrow Families. I was working for Cumbria Partnership Health Trust. So I've worked with children and families for a long time now. I was born in Barrow as well, brought up in Barrow, so yes, my whole life.
So Love Barrows is very personal to you.
It is.
As well as professional.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alison?
Yeah, I met Trina when I came over to be a social worker in Barrow a long time ago. Worked in child protection before moving to NSPCC, and then I worked as an independent. I worked independently and also qualified as a play therapist. And then I had my little girl, and then Trina and I continued to work together, and that's how sort of Love Barrow Families came about from that point, really. So I guess we've been around the system of child protection and therapeutic work for quite a number of years before Love Barrow Families was sort of born, really.
Fantastic. So before we move on to talk about Love Barrows itself, could you just give us a little bit of context, tell us a bit about Barrow and the place that Love Barrows was born in?
So yeah, Barrow-in-Furness is it's on the northwest coast of England, of Cumbria. We're a working class shipbuilding town, population of about 70,000 now. Quite isolated. It takes about 45 minutes to get to the motorway from Barrow, so lots of people have stayed here. We have a real strong sense of community still. We sometimes have people kind of coming in trying to encourage us to do different things, and I have a little bit of a concern that what's already here gets missed. It's quite difficult because it's quite quiet and in the background, but there's a real strong sense of connection still between people and neighbourliness and things like that. We have high rates of deprivation, particularly in the town centre. We've hit the news for lots of negative reasons, I guess, recently. Drug dealing, drug abuse, increasing numbers of children coming into care and on the child protection register, lots of poverty. But lots of hope, I think, as well, and goodness and pride.
Yeah, I've heard you speak about Barrow before and got that sense of the challenges, but also the hope that shines through the people.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
We always say that people in Barrow say it as it is. They're really proud folk and they say it as it is, but they have big hearts.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So that's a bit of context. Can you tell us now what Love Barrows is?
It's a long story. It'll stop me if I go on too much.
So if you give us perhaps a brief introduction to what Love Barrows is now? I'm sure over the course of our conversation we'll go into details about all aspects of it.
I guess it came about because Alison and I had worked in public services and for third sector for a number of years, and what we'd seen was services becoming more fragmented, families struggling more, organisations kind of almost wanting to discharge people before they'd provided a service. There was a number of child deaths locally that meant that services were really driven by anxiety. And the health trust that I worked for at the time had some forward-thinking directors, and it was really through a relationship that I built with one of them, Dr. John Howarth, that we started to think about the possibility of doing something different. And it started with a bursary through the health trust. That's how we began. So I'll hand over to Alison, see if Alison wants to say a little bit about the journey.
Yeah, and I think alongside that, we're doing the validation of the school age assessment, weren't we, with Pat? And Trina was undertaking AI interviews and school age assessment, and also we did the strange situation. And at the time, we were doing 50 families and 25 from the word normative and 25 from clinical. And I think what we found was that a lot of people who've had really tough experiences wanted to influence and do something different. And that was also something that was really important. And I think alongside that, Trina, you'd researched the work of John Seddon, hadn't you, about mapping, about assets and strength-based. And I think that also we mapped out what families were telling us they wanted, and also at the same time we were aware of the fragmentation of the system and what the professionals were telling us. So we got a cohort of professionals from all the different agencies and asked them what their views were, and alongside that we worked with the families as well.
There's a lot in there, but also it sounds like you were aware of the DMM and Pat's work, and both exploring those ideas at a crucial point when Love Barrows was developed. So was the DMM very influential to you in the particular direction you went in?
So I first met Pat, actually I first met Clark as well. I think it was in 2001 when Pat came over. She was invited to come over through the NSPCC to do the adult attachment interview. So it was a bit like being thrown in at the deep end, but absolutely fascinating. And at the time I was working for the NSPCC, and I was working as a play therapist with looked after children. And it was the added piece, I guess, that I wanted, which was the contribution that the adults make. So I was fascinated, and it just kind of, it got me really at that point. And I think anyone who knows Pat, she's quite unique, really, the impact of what she has to say and who she is and what she does. And it was as much about the kind of philosophical basis of the DMM, I think, for me, that caught my attention. And also the idea of really understanding what was going on, because it felt like we were often making judgments or assumptions, whereas the DMM feels like it gives a proper understanding. And my experience of when I've used the assessments with families is that they also see that, they feel understood.
So you said this was against a backdrop of maybe a service in trouble a little bit, and that the DMM philosophy was important to you in setting up Love Barrows. Can you say a little bit more about what it is about the philosophy of the DMM that seemed to grab hold of you at that time?
I think one of the things was that it embraces complexity. Sometimes it feels like it stretches your brain, you know, to manage all of the complexity. But also, I think that's where the answers are. It's also, I can't think of the words, but compassionate. And one of the things that we were determined to do with Love Barrow Families was to not be set up as experts, to not to kind of give the message to the families that we worked with that we were equal, you know, that we had skills, experience, knowledge that we brought that could be used to help to understand and think about what we might do. But equally, those families had a lot to teach us as well, and they did. You know, we learned a vast amount from them. So we used, well, at the time we used co-production theory, so the New Economics Foundation's definition of co-production, and we looked at asset-based working, like Alison said, and I'm still involved in some of those things now, and also I'm involved in some training, as Alison is, that Pat's doing for us. And it does seem to me that there's common threads that run through, really. Sort of embracing the community as well, and what's in the community and how that supports families or not. So I don't know whether that answers your question. I think I've lost my track a little bit.
No, I think that's really interesting. Alison, is there anything from your perspective you'd add to that?
I think it is about understanding, and I think we were aware that there was fragmentation in the system, and we also knew that programs weren't working, and we knew that families were, what we were at that time, were being asked to go around different services, and it was like a revolving door, and we knew something needed to change. I think Trina having gone and started the AI, it opened up another avenue that we could explore and follow. And certainly when we did the AMP in Barrow, that helped a lot of other professionals to have an interest as well. So we were fortunate to be able to bring that to Barrow.
That's a really interesting backdrop. Wasn't sure what that was. So that's an interesting backdrop. So when Love Barrow Families was initially set up, what was the remit? What were you doing with families and the system right at the beginning?
So right at the beginning, we didn't want to do anything to them. We wanted to talk to them about the reality of what was happening and what might be a better way of working. So the original bursary that we got was £500, and that allowed Alison and I to meet with 6 families, all from kind of different backgrounds, but all that had been known to the system in different ways for a number of years. And we facilitated 3 meetings, I think, with them, and asked them. We asked them about what their views were, what worked, what didn't work, and they shared that with us. And as Alison said before, we also did that with a group of professionals across the different services in Barrow. And we built a service around what those families told us, basically, within public services. So we pulled together a plan, and we had to submit that to the NHS, to the Partnership Trust. And we had, I think it was £90,000 bursary to set up, didn't we?
Yeah.
So, and essentially what families wanted was everything in one place. So we did pull together in different ways. So some of the staff were seconded, but we had a team that joined up adult mental health, children's mental health, child protection, social care. And we had things like a seconded adult psychiatrist in our team. One of the other things that families were very clear about was that they didn't want to have to tell their story over and over again. So we looked at all the different screening assessments, I guess, that there were in the services, and worked together to come up with one assessment for a family that covered the adults and the children. And we used the adult attachment interview and the school age assessment with nearly all of the families at some point that we were involved with. There was 20 families originally in the pilot, most of whom were quite big families, most of whom had 4 or 5 children, didn't they?
They did.
Many of whom were, the children were at risk of going into care. We had a couple of families whose children were in care. Yeah.
And I think the families at that time, they were at risk of pre-proceedings. And I think the other thing, families were telling us they were frightened, living in the fear of having the children removed, and what would that mean? And at the time, it was quite unusual because we had to argue quite hard for myself to have a tripartite agreement. So it's quite unusual. So I was employed by the Health Trust, seconded over to the local authority, and then based within the Barrow Families. So it's quite unusual at the time. So it meant I was managed by the local authority, which is quite interesting, but also posed quite a lot of dilemmas as well.
How did the transition into this way of working? Was it seamless? Was it smooth? Did the families instantly appreciate this alternative approach?
I wouldn't say they instantly appreciated it. I think they learned about it. Most of the families didn't trust us when we started. And I remember the first family that we worked with, it was a family that had been known for many, many years, and the children were at home. The 3 children were at home, and I did the AAI with the mum, and she sat with a coat on, would hardly speak to me, her head down. It was a struggle for us both. And when we looked at it, and when Pat classified it for us, it really helped us to find a starting point that was not just understanding, but almost celebrating what this woman had been able to achieve in the context of her history. The fact that she even had her 3 children with her was amazing, really. And so I think once we started working in that way with families, then that was the first step, I guess, to people learning to trust, I suppose, and getting it. But I think most families, once they realised, it happened quite quickly. And I think that's one of the things, well, certainly for me, I learned was that sometimes it's not the people that we work with that have a problem with trust. It's us. It's the professionals. And there was a few different interactions I had with a number of the families that we worked with that taught me that. I remember there was a dad who had, I think he was about 50, and he'd been drinking since he was a teenager. And I was working as a play therapist with his son, and he used to come and bring his son every week. And he used to wait for him and then take him home. And at the end of one of the play therapy sessions, the little boy wanted to take some clay home with him. It was quite messy clay. And his dad was stood in the kitchen, and his dad just looked at me and he said, "What do I do with this?" And my first thought was he was being sarcastic, and I missed it. And for some reason, I think I caught his eye contact, and he was really deadly serious. He wanted me to tell him how to play using clay with his dad. And it taught me with his son, it taught me a lesson, taught me that, just that sometimes families are ready to jump in and trust. It's us that have the issue.
That sounds like it sounds like the DMM then, and that way of thinking had really shifted the way that you were perceiving the families, and that had a sort of effect on how they then built trust with you too. Yeah. You mentioned dads then. Mm-hmm. So was it, how did you work with the whole family unit?
Well, we worked with anybody, any part of the family. So grandparents, foster parents, who we worked with. We encouraged everybody to be part of what we were doing. I think that meant that we gave a message to people that they were included. So like we had one of the first families that we took, it was a dad that was in prison. He'd been in and out of prison for about 10 years, hadn't he, Alison? And we went to see him in prison, and he wanted to talk to us about having contact with his children. So we went and visited him, and we built I suppose it's about relationships. We made a connection with him, and he started to talk to us a little bit, and he wanted to be part of something. I mean, that's one of the things that families have been absolutely clear about, that the thing that made the difference to them and led to many of the outcomes that we achieved was because they had somewhere to belong to. It was a sense of belonging, and that provided in some ways what was needed to be able to make the other changes.
And I think the other part of it, Trina, was as well, the families wanted to change, but also it's about containing it for the system as well. So I was thinking about the DMM and the AI, and what that enabled was to say to the social worker managers, just hold that for a minute and just give us 6 weeks to see what progress we can make. And it allowed us to do things in a step-by-step that contained the system's anxiety as well. And I was thinking then when you talked about the dad who we went to see in prison, and how we took the we went with the probation officer to start with, and helped them to think about it in a different way as well. So I think there was, alongside work with the families, it was helping the system try and understand it as well.
Yeah, and we were very much on the ground doing what was needed, and that could be anything. So we tried to provide what was needed when it was needed. So we often did things like we might pay for a training course for one of the parents that they wanted to go on. We might provide food. I once went in on Christmas Day, cooked Christmas dinner for everybody. We tried to, I suppose, create that sense of belonging. And to be fair, we belonged as well. Like it was a place that we belonged to, and it was a safe place for us, because within the system at that time, there was a lot of anxiety. And I suppose the other thing about the DMM is it really helps to hold risk. Massively helps to hold risk, because, and not just for the system, but for us as social workers, because the families were families where there was significant worries. And so having an understanding of what that was about, and where to start, where to begin, and what to look at was reassuring. Because I think lots of parents get sent to psychotherapy or counselling, and they don't really know what it is they need to think about, and the people who are working with them don't know either. But what the DMM does is it provides you with the information and the kind of order, I suppose, the sequence of what to tackle and when to tackle it. And when you get it right, when it happens, it's almost like, it feels a bit like magic, like the magic dust that we talk about. That I remember, again, one of the first families we worked with, thinking with her about the number of traumas and losses that she'd had, this mum, and allowing her to decide which one of those she would look at. And one of them was her experience of being in care when she was young. And within a fairly short space of time, she was able to stand in the shoes of her son, who was also in care. And it shifted something in the relationship sooner than we imagined it would. And it was because we tackled the right thing at the right time for that mum, and allowed her to experience me standing in her shoes, which meant she could then stand in her son's shoes.
You're both experienced practitioners, but it almost sounds like the DMM and the start of Love Barrow Families was almost like sprinkling magical dust over this and opened up this whole way of understanding. I mean, was it more gradual than that for you, or was it the lifting of the constraints of a system and a service allowed you to practice how you wanted to as practitioners?
I don't want to go off on a tangent too much, but the magic dust came from a personal experience of mine, the idea of magic dust. So, like I said at the beginning, I was a foster parent for many years, and looked after the daughter of my foster daughter. And so I had an experience of adult psychiatric care because of the woman that I fostered was in a psychiatric unit, and I would go up there, and I was involved in the ward rounds and things, and I was dismayed, I guess is the word, by just how it felt like stepping back in time almost. And Pat was a listening ear, Pat at the time, and helped me to think about it a little bit. But one of the things that happened was we had a psychiatrist. He was training, wasn't qualified, but he started to chair the meetings, the ward rounds. And it was amazing, the difference it made. And it really, at the time I was working in CAMS, and I was quite, feeling quite hopeless really about the state that services were in. And this psychiatrist did some things for us, allowed some conversations, was able to challenge and say the things that needed to be said and form a relationship with us. And it made me think, that's what I do. That's what I do for other people. And that's the magic dust really. And it felt like there was magic dust in the relationship. So between Pat and myself, and between myself and the psychiatrist and my foster daughter, and then us, that's where the idea of the magic dust came from. And I think when I started to use the phrase, my granddaughter was 6, so and she was living with me. Her mum was in the psychiatric hospital, and she'd not really remembered her birthdays. And on her 6th birthday, we got up, and the phone was flashing, and we pressed play on the phone, and it was her mum singing happy birthday to her. She'd remembered, and I think I said to you, Alison, that's the magic dust. And the thing about magic dust is that once it's sprinkled, it continues to work. It's in the background just working, and you don't really know, you know, what it's doing, but it's doing lots of different things. That's where the magic dust came from.
You may have just answered this question, but for both of you, was there a moment when you realised what you'd created and how things were going to be different? So a particular time when that happened?
I think we were determined.
I think we put our heart and soul and our life into it. We were determined. We were.
I think the moment was when we realised that the Health Trust and the local authority were going to allow us to do it. That was the moment when it was, right, this is it. Yeah. And like I said before, it was very different then. You know, it was we probably wouldn't have had the same opportunity now. And what was challenging doesn't describe it. It's been a really difficult journey.
In the early days, was there significant pushback from other professionals and services?
A lot of it was about the relationships that we had with different people. So we were lucky because we had a good manager in health who really tried to protect what we were doing, and was senior enough to hold and contain. The local authority, it was more difficult, I think, because they were being monitored by Ofsted, and so it felt risky to them to do anything different. And Alison was the lead social worker, so she was line managed by me, but she also had a manager in social care as well, who helped her, well, supported her to manage the cases. That was tricky. I think that was tricky. But I think that the biggest risk, the biggest challenge was the change in people, that we just would feel like we'd got into a place where we were settled and we had support, and then somebody would leave, or well, actually the manager from health, she died. She had a heart attack and she died quite suddenly. And I remember when I got the news about that, because I was absolutely devastated. I knew what it would mean. So yeah, it was about relationships.
And one of the things I remember was I was being really, you'll remember this well, Trina, I remember introducing the director of the local authority and meeting with the senior director in the NHS, and they sat on the sofa with us, and it's the first time they'd met each other. And I really found it fascinating that these two organisations were trying to work together, yet they'd never met and sat on the same sofa. And it felt like, whoa, this is something that is really quite different, that we're bringing senior managers together to talk about something that is so important. And yet, why has this not been done before?
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So it sounded like a lot of these people were getting introduced for the first time. And so how involved was Pat at this point?
Pat's been involved all the way along.
Mm-hmm.
So when we did the launch, Pat came to the launch and did a talk for us. I've just sent her it actually. I found the video. She said she looks really young. Yeah, so Pat came and did a talk at the launch, and she's kind of just been there all the way along, really, hasn't she, Alison?
I just see that she's like a guiding star. She's like a wise, we always refer to the wise people who have helped us. I think Pat's got so much wisdom. And I remember saying to us, and you'll remember it as well, Trina, when she said, start off with families that aren't quite as complex. Unfortunately, it didn't happen like that. But yeah, she's just been there for us and supported us along our journey.
I think the other thing, and is the DMM really, is it's very individualised. And Pat encouraged us to really, from the word go, find out, ask people, ask families, parents, children, what it was that we were doing that was making a difference to them, the detail of what it was that we were doing that was making a difference, to really, really listen to that. And that was quite different to what was happening at the time, because a lot of the, you know, like the signs of safety, there was lots of different kind of programs and ways of working that the organisations were taking on. And Pat really encouraged us to have that kind of reciprocal relationship with families, really.
And this might sound like a silly question. When you started listening to families and what they said they wanted, did you find that things opened up and that the work was more successful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in fact, right from the word go,
they didn't ask for the world.
No. I mean, when we first started, we had an office free of charge in a school that came through a relationship with the head teacher, and then we moved to our own building in the town centre. Was what was the old neighbourhood management service. We went into their building. It was like a shop front, and that was probably maybe a year into, just under a year, and the people that we were working with wanted to paint it and make it theirs with us, you know. So it was that equality, I guess. It was belonging to something that was ours, all of ours.
I think it's striking that when you talk about it, you do talk in a very collective way as being part of this programme just as much as families were too.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm going to do a talk for Research in Practice again coming up, and one of the dads who's going to do it with me said, don't forget to talk about the AAI.
So that's another question then. So how have the families, then really, they've been brought on board with the AA, with the DMM front and centre. How have they found it as a model to understand their lives and their relationships?
I think because the experience of it has been such a positive one for people, and because they've felt like understood, I can't think of another word. There's some recognition of what it offers that's different, and the changes that people have been able to make as well, and You know, because the way that we use them, we try to use them not just to inform therapy or psychological help, but also to inform day-to-day work with parents in particular.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so practicing things, learning new skills. That was part of what we did, and I think that's where it came to life for some of the parents as well, where they could see that the understanding then led to, so what can I do different, and then they were able to practice. So like there was one dad that was a high C, and sorry, go on, Alison.
Go on, sorry, no. I was just saying then that linked with how we worked together, didn't we? Because you might offer the therapeutic side and help me to think about what I needed to do when I went out into the family home as a social worker, and I would then try to back to you when you did your therapeutic work. So there was a real integration of how we worked together, really, to think about that, and also how we brought the children into that process as well, through the family work and therapeutic work we did.
Yeah.
So there was an emphasis on seeing everybody as an equal partner in the family, but also in the system as well. It does seem so simple and so obvious in the way that you talk about it, but I know I've worked in services where each member around the table has a different formulation and is working to a different end goal.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a case that you say you had a really good relationship with the psychiatrist? But did you need to win over the professionals who were brought in, or did you bring in professionals who you knew were of this particular mindset?
We tried to bring in professionals who we knew were of the particular mindset, but they were from different services, and the cultures within those services are very different. So it was a learning curve for everybody. You know, so the way that adult mental health services work is very different to the way that children's social care or even children's mental health, but we all learned from each other. And the other thing was that most of the team had adult attachment interviews as well, to help them to think about, you know, their contribution and learn.
That's fascinating. And
I remember us debating, Trina, in one of the meetings, about the use of language and how language was used in health, and how that was between the different systems around just simple language.
Yeah.
And having an agreed way forward on that.
Yeah.
We used to debate that quite a bit, didn't we?
Yeah. 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 So yeah, it wasn't easy. You know, it isn't a case of just putting people together in an office, is it? We worked really hard to build relationships and learn from each other, but it was fascinating. So we had an occupational therapist from the adult mental health team, and working with her and learning from her, and her learning from us in terms of the DMM and the adult attachment interviews. It was great. You know, it was a really positive experience, but we all worked hard to, I suppose, stay true to the principles of the project. We really worked hard to do that. We all held each other. Every meeting we had, we talked about it. How are we doing? Are we doing what we said we were going to do? So the team, which was a co-located team, so we were all in one office. Although it was challenging, I think that it was a safe place. It just felt like a safe place for people to be honest with each other and try and work things out. And everybody knew that something needed to change. I think that was the other thing. It's still like that now. I think there is a thirst for doing things in a different way.
Mm-hmm. What was the makeup of the team right at the start?
Do you want to answer that, Alison?
Yeah, we had, so Trina was project lead, and I was lead social worker, and then we had seconded hours from an OT and a family worker, and then we had a family therapist a day a week too, and then we had a student as well, who was trained to be a social worker? I think it was a social worker too. And then we had a part-time family worker. So we had a lot of staff who were seconded, and we looked at what each family, what they actually needed and how we could support them based upon the skill set of the team, really. But yeah, it was, we looked like we were a big team, but actually it was quite a lot of part-time roles, wasn't there?
How many families were you working with from the start?
We worked with about 20. We worked with 20 families overall, and as Trina said, a lot of them had a lot of, large families, looking at 4 or 5 children. And I think when we talk about families and say 20, it sounds not a lot, but actually it's quite a lot of individuals within that. Yeah.
And were you able to do DMM measures with all of the family members, or did you decide over time that you would only look at certain measures?
We tried to focus on as many families as we could, certainly the families who were in proceedings, who were really, there was concerns about their children being removed from their care. So they were like the priority families, but Trina was the only person in the team at that time who could do the adult attachment interview, so we also had to be mindful of that as well. Our limited resources as well, I guess. So
it sounds like the DMM was being used in the families that really needed it, using the tools directly, but otherwise it was part of the philosophy and the way of understanding and working alongside the families as well.
Yeah. I think every time that we not just did the AAI but thought about it and used it, we learned something that then also informed when we saw that again with other families. So there was the AC distinction that was, there was not often, but there was a few people that we worked with that seemed, when you were with them day to day, very much on the C side, C-ish. And then when the AAI came back and it had been looked at kind of more objectively, they were a high A, and with lots and lots of trauma and things. And so those things made a big difference. So, one of the mums who was in care proceedings at the time, who would explode everywhere, it made a real difference to how not just us but other people managed her in the core group meetings and the different places that she had to go. So it was very much about preparing her and kind of trying to soothe, really, rather than seeing her as being, doing it on purpose, having some control over it, I guess.
That almost sends a bit of a sort of almost a shiver down my spine, in a sense that that lady had the opportunity to be understood by you and your team, but so many others throughout social care, throughout mental health care, don't have that opportunity and functionally are being misunderstood. So that's a really powerful example of what you were doing.
Yeah, and I think that distinction between what you see, because I was steeped in the DMM in many ways by the time we were doing the AAIs, but it's still difficult when you're faced with people, when you're in a relationship with people who are exploding everywhere, to actually have some objectivity and see what's going on, and to help other people as well, because other people react strongly to explosions, don't they?
And I think it was a really steep learning curve, and that was really helpful, especially when there was the antisocial behaviour and the behaviour was being exploded out in the system, and trying to help other agencies to understand that was really important.
Did you have many successes when communicating with the other agencies? Were they attracted to the ideas that you were sharing with them?
I think it's fair to say that most of the agencies were. I think where it was difficult was when it was there was not a clear agreement between our team and the local authority senior managers. There was a couple of cases where the different ways of working clashed. and that was difficult. But in general, you know, like schools, for example, health visitors, the police, you know, the AAIs and the DMM assessments helped everybody who came to the meetings, you know, the multi-agency meetings. It was used as a way of sharing with other people and having a kind of ongoing flexible plan.
And I think the times when we didn't necessarily always, the local authority didn't always agree with us, it was because of how those managers were supported to manage risk and some of the things that were happening locally at that time that influenced on that as well.
I think it's very encouraging to hear that even people outside of the core group of committed practitioners, they saw the benefit of this approach, and that it does show that we can communicate with people who are maybe not thinking in this way and bring them on board, and in that way allow the DMM to spread further.
Yeah.
So moving forward a little bit, so that was Love Barrow Families at the beginning. Where is it now?
So our roles have changed over the last year because I'm involved in something called Love Barrow Together. So essentially that's about trying to change the way that other services in Barrow work with families. So trying to use some of the learning that we took from Love Barrow Families to do that. And we've got a new chief exec in the Borough Council who's really forward thinking. So it's quite an exciting time really. So I'm still a director for Love Barrow Families, but I'm not running Love Barrow Families day to day. Alison's leading Love Barrow Families.
And obviously we lost our funding about 3 years ago when all the austerity cuts hit. So we became a community interest company. So that had a big difference. So we looked at how could we be different, how could we adapt, and what we thought was, okay, we need to focus on this. So we looked at how we could do early intervention and put support into early intervention in the hope that we can prevent families getting to the point where they're going to be entering care proceedings.
And how's the makeup of the team changed in that time?
Changed a lot because we lost the funding, so we had to go to being trying to find grants, application forms in. So we've currently got 3 full-time members of staff and 1 part-time member of staff at the moment. But I think we still, for me, it's still about being able to make a difference. And we've never been a huge team, and it's always been about offering the best we can for the families that we work with.
It sounds like when you started, you were very heavy, you're both obviously very experienced and then very influenced by the DMM and some other ideas as well. But what have you learned over the process? What do you now know about families and what they need, perhaps compared to when you started?
The biggest thing for me is that it's organisations that need to change, not families, and that the organisations serve their own purpose, I think, sometimes, and also that there's a lot of compulsive caregivers in the helping professions, people who really want to help and are very well-meaning, but it isn't always the best thing for families. I remember when going up to the psychiatric ward and watching what was happening with my foster daughter with all the professionals, and it was fascinating because she worked so hard to make them feel good at their job. She was really struggling, really poorly, but she knew what to do. She knew she had to smile and she had to make people feel good, and it was quite distressing actually to see it, you know, given that I was a professional myself, to actually see that played out. It's a lot of effort goes into pleasing us professionals.
Andrea spoke a few weeks ago, and I think he described it as try to be a little bit more depressed in your caregiving strategy. So not always seeking to perform for the strategy to be working effectively at all times.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I was really interested in when I first met Pat was about us, about the professionals, you know, and it's a whole other world, isn't it, really? You know, it's a whole other topic about what we bring and why we're doing what we're doing and how that affects the people that we're working with. And it's we're all on our own journey, I guess, aren't we? We're all learning things about ourselves all the time.
Was that an active part of the design right at the beginning, to really turn a lens, turn the flashlight on yourselves and understand your own strategies and how those would interact with the families? Or did that come as you got embedded in the work?
I think I started to think about it when I started to learn about the contribution that adoptive parents or foster parents make, and then I started to think about the professionals and the social workers and the psychologists and what they bring. And I suppose what I realised was that we don't talk about it, or maybe we do a little bit more now, but we certainly didn't then. In the social work world, it was very much, they're the people over there that you help and we are the helpers. It was very, very clear.
The big thing you talked about is co-production. And are you still in contact with some of the families that were there at the very beginning? Have you seen successes for them?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the frustrating things when the local authority and the health trust weren't able to continue funding us, because we had a really, really positive evaluation. You know, we had lots of children who were on the child protection register. I think there was, I can't remember the numbers now, but I think there was something like 17 or 18 children on the child protection register when we started, and there was only 1 or 2 after 2 years. Children returning home who are still at home now. We measured all sorts of things, and there was lots and lots of positive changes. And I think it's been lovely to be around and see that those changes have been sustained. You know, so a lot of children who return home to families end up coming back into care again, don't they? And there's it's not just about the intervention, if you like. It's about everything else around it, and it's about the long term. And it might be that professionals are needed, or it might be that neighbours can provide support, or resident. We run a couple of residence groups, those kinds of things. But I think sometimes what happens is families. Well, I know what happens is families who are really struggling come into the system, and they are seen to be fixed, and then they're discharged and they disappear, and then a year later they need some help and they have to go right back through the whole being referred and assessed and things again. I think one of the things that's been really good about being in Barrow and staying around in Barrow for Alison and myself is that we have a number of people who just come and find us. So they'll manage all right for a year, even 2 years, and then just pop up and say, can I come and talk to you?
And I think what we would say, Trina, is that life do have blips. Life is a bit of a roller coaster at different points, at different people's lives. We need to link back in again. And I think that's one of the strengths of Love Barrow Families. And I think people, like you say, do still search us out. I think from other agencies, there's a little bit of people could say, do we create dependency? And I would challenge that, because I think we're there and we're a safety net, and people use us when they need to link back in again. And I don't think it's creating dependency. I think it's about being there at the right time in the right place, and people know they can come back because they trust us, and we can help them at that point, and then they move.
Yeah, so one of the things that I used to say was that people need to be dependent before they can become independent. In attachment terms, people need to be able to trust and have, to be allowed to be dependent, if that's the right word, and then to take steps to become more independent. And I think that's another thing about the DMM and the idea of the zone of proximal development, that's been a massive learning for us with parents, that finding the right step, the next step, at the right tiny step at the right time for that person that they can manage is absolutely key to the longer term outcomes, if you like. Because we have all these things that we do to people and put them on courses, and the DWP come and do this and someone else will come and do that, but actually it's not about that. It's about trying to work out for that person what they can manage, the little step that they can manage next. And with Love Barrow Families, that sense of belonging that was created there then enabled people with support to do that. So like Love Barrow Families employed 2 of the family members who came to us when we first started, and it was that gradual step. And actually those people now are the people who are absolutely full of the philosophy. They absolutely get it because they've experienced it.
So there's something very different there between going through a course and rote learning content to repeat back, and that's that performative element, but actually living and experience something so that it becomes embedded, it becomes procedural, but then being able to return to that stable base when need be as well. Yeah.
And I think the families themselves have almost become, they belong to each other. So even though Love Barrow Families, the 20 families that we had, a lot of them have moved on, they're still in touch with each other. So it created some connection that sustained them as well.
That's wonderful. So are there any things, if you could have a wish list of things that you would add in to Love Barrow Families, so if the local authority wrote you a blank check, what would you add to what you're doing?
What I want is the whole of Barrow initially to work in the same way that Love Barrow Families worked. That's what I want to happen. And then Cumbria. That was the idea when we first started. That was the idea that Love Barrow Families was a catalyst for wider change. So that's what I would like to happen.
Beyond Cumbria, Trina. Every county in the country. Good.
Do you feel that you've obviously faced difficulties, and you've sort of outlined some of the contextual reasons why that it might have been difficult in Cumbria. Do you see there is an appetite for this? There has been a shift towards this way of working?
I think that there's a thirst for something good to happen. It's interesting, I think I was saying in an earlier meeting today, I invited Professor June Thorburn to come and speak. She's a professor of social work and she wrote a lot of books. She's a bit like Pat, she's written and published really widely. And I invited her to come, not really expecting very many local social workers to come, but we had about 50 social workers who chose to come. So that says something about what people need and the climate that we're in, I think. And certainly within Barrow, there's an appetite to do things differently.
Does it feel like the community recognise that this has happened and it's had a positive impact, and they want more of this type of approach?
I think the community, to be fair, probably have always known what they wanted. If they'd have been listened to, if families were listened to in the way that we were able to listen to the families that we worked with at the beginning, then there's a lot of things that the community in Barrow has got, has got right. And sometimes what happens is it's almost removed, that we're looking for the next fancy thing to come in, when actually having a good neighbour, having somewhere like Love Barrow Families to belong to, those are really important things. And relationships are important to people in Barrow. You could stop anybody in the street in Barrow if you needed help and ask them for help, and they would help you. They'd just drop whatever they were doing and they would help you. So I think that I know I keep repeating the same thing, but the organisations need to learn, I think, from the community as well.
And I think the families tell each other in the community. They tell each other where to go, and often, you know, when I say, how did you hear about it? They say, oh, so and so told us because you helped them. And I think it's the word of mouth, and families trust other families. And it's almost like Trina just said, on the word on the street is, this is where you can go to get help.
And we can't keep taking people's children away, you know, that's what it feels like in Barrow, you know. And I know there's people like Andy Bilson, Paul Bywaters and various other people, Breed Featherstone, have been talking a lot about poverty and the impact that has on families, and then the rising child protection figures. And coming from Barrow, it just feels so unfair that that's what's happening. And there are really good, you know, good theory, you know, like the DMM, the assessments that can change, you know, they can change the risks, they can make a difference to people. You know, there are things we can do to stop that from happening, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And so we're coming to a close now, but there might be people listening here who are involved in services of their own or are looking to set something up. Is there any advice that you would give to any professional from any background who's looking to use a similar approach to the one that you have?
I'd say start small and probably stay small to begin with anyway, and be realistic.
Yeah, I'd say it's been a steep learning curve.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a journey, but well worth one.
I think from listening to both of you, though, one of the things that really stands out to me is this idea of understanding. Mm-hmm. And that it sounds so simple, but it doesn't happen so often. But you've built an understanding with the people you're working with, your colleagues and the families, and that co-creation as well is talking to everybody who's involved, and not just believing that we as professionals know what is best for people, but listening and hearing their stories too. That seems really important from what you've said.
Yeah, I think when we set out, sometimes when we spoke, and even now when we speak, I think it doesn't convey the complexity and the kind of amount of years of experience and knowledge and things that went into setting it up. And that's the reason it worked, I think. It's not a simple thing. It isn't a simple thing to do. Need to have support. You know, but the DMM is a really hopeful model, isn't it? And you know, having Pat as a mentor and a teacher, I mean, she's amazing, isn't she? You know, she's changed the world for thousands and thousands of families through what she's done. And I suppose we're all changing the world as well, you know, through all the different people that we work with and the different lives that we touch. And that message of understanding is really important. You know, somewhere like Barrow, where families are causing trouble, it's a really, the DMM is a really useful way to help people to see it differently, to see the trauma and the loss, and kind of put themselves in other people's shoes.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, both of you. It's a wonderful organisation, and it's fantastic to talk to you both about it. Are you happy to take questions?
Yeah, we are. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
This fragmentation of work with the families really needs to have just a few people to come to in order to feel safe, to be open about their experiences and be able to be understood. I mean, it's devastating how things are working from the government side regarding these poor families. And it was just so reassuring to hear you again, because I've been to these meetings and I was thinking, oh my God, I got a real headache about this. So thank you. That was not the question. I just had to say the praise. Thank you.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because we know so much now, and yet, you know, the fragmentation is still happening.
It's just so sad. I mean, so many clever people and so many families that just, you know, when you reach out for them and they just want you to be there for them, and they just sent away. And well, it's really, and I think that what we learn from following up people who are starting to understand, and we are trying to do some, you know, have them taste the change. And then you learn so much about developmental psychology, about, you know, how people adapt, how the attachment system works. And so there's such an opportunity to learn. And yeah, I think the way we see individuals as machineries are just, you know, go around in a maze. And yeah, well, this was a great moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Bente.
Thanks, Bente.
Hi, and yeah, thank you for just what you shared. I felt particularly moved just by the sense that you guys have accomplished a framework where you're working, but with a sense of community, and you know, it just felt really it felt really real. I suppose I've got a number of questions actually, because I found it so fascinating that you guys you know, you did your own attachment strategies, your own AIs within your team. And I just think that that's such a invaluable source of information, because yeah, how do our strategies impact the working alliance? But I suppose first and foremost, what was really something that's really, I would ask anybody who works in this field, are you, in your AIs, when you're working with these families, are you coming across any families that are their attachment strategies falling within the normative population? So the low C's and the low A's, are they showing up in these families that are coming into the spotlight of social services?
Not really. A couple, a small number. I think. We had, I think did we have two that were balanced, Alison, parents?
I think so.
Yeah, I think, my experience, sorry, go on.
I think we had two, and then we had a couple that were reorganising after they'd had family therapy. I think, did we have one or two that were working towards reorganising after they'd had extensive work with family therapist?
I think that sometimes, I mean, not even with Barrow Families, but when I was in the child and adolescent mental health service, it felt that there was children who were in care who were perceived as having something like reactive attachment disorder, when actually they'd probably been fairly balanced and were quite understandably having a reaction to having been removed from the family. So I have had that experience where trying to help social workers to understand that children who are showing their distress doesn't necessarily mean that they're...
So that's really interesting. So that you're working with a balanced, and then they're having a strong reaction to being removed, and so they're presenting, you know, if you were doing this interview with or meeting this family without the knowledge of the AI, you would maybe be interpreting them as like highly dysfunctional, when actually they're just having quite a big understandably having quite a big reaction to the process that's unfolding. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes it's what I said before about the work with families that we do on a one-to-one with parents. There's particular losses or traumas that are causing the problem. Now, so Pat talked in her training that she's been doing with us this week about a man that was, I think, touching his daughter inappropriately. And he was removed from the family, and she told the whole story about it. But basically, this man went back into the family. He was assessed, and it was about focusing on the things that had happened to him that had led to the distortions that he was making with his child in order to make it safer. So it's I suppose it's what I was saying, what I was saying before, that the reason I like the AI is that it gives you the thing to focus on to make the difference. So there can be children, I guess, who are in situations that look risky, but they're caused by whatever it is that's going on for the parent. And I think it's possible to understand specific losses and traumas and the reaction that people have to them without having to trawl through 10 years of one-to-one therapy.
And just lastly, how did doing your own AAIs, if you can answer this question, inform your approach and your relationship with the people that you've worked with? Is it possible to?
So I had my AAI when I did the AAI training, which was in 2001. And I remember feeling the day afterwards like everything had been thrown up into the air, and it took a while for it to settle back down again. I think the experience of having had it is useful when you give it to other people. I think it provides, I think that the AI itself is therapeutic. It's a therapeutic experience. And I think, like I said before, that many of us are attracted to the helping professions are attracted for a particular reason. And it's a journey, isn't it, to discover those things about yourself and how you behave and the reasons that you behave in the way that you do with other people, families and colleagues and your own family. And so I think the AI for me was part of that journey. Yeah. And
I have to confess, I haven't had my AI done. I wasn't in work, I think, when Clark came up to see the team. So I haven't had mine done. So I'm afraid I can't comment on that. But I can see the benefits from other team members who have.
I don't have a question. I'll just say I'm just loved seeing you again, hearing what you do. And I'm so impressed with just how you've kept this going, you know, and the stickability of it, the continuity. And the way that you, although you use the AI, you know, you really do work at the community level. And I think that's very good, actually. So, well, you know, great. Very pleased. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
Love to
Thanks,
see
Steve.
you again, Steve.
Yeah, you. Yeah. No, I meant that though, because I think it's a great achievement, and to keep this going through all the funding cuts and all the other problems that come along, you know, it's no mean task. Very good. That's it, by the way.
I think you must be the longest follower of the DMM here, Steve, are you?
Me?
Like
I'm not sure. Bento?
Oh yeah, Benta as well.
Oh,
Clark,
Yeah.
who else is here?
I don't think it's a competition, but
No, it's not. 1995, I think I began. Don't know.
yeah, that's me too. That's
There we go.
I had a very brief question, Alex.
Yeah, go ahead, Clark.
Yeah, I might have missed this because my neighbor knocked at the door and I was away for a few minutes, but did you talk about the House of Lords and some of the awards that you've have been given to Love Barrow Families?
No, we didn't. No.
Oh, we didn't.
Well,
We forget those bits.
well, you've had some very high profile recognitions as well as speaking at the House of Lords. I recall those being in DMM News. So just, a moment of celebration of that. And could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. I think that many of the talks that we've done have been, we've shared the presentation with some of the families that we've worked with. And the House of Lords, we I can't remember who came with us. Was it?
It was the dad with
the dad with us.
the dad.
And I think that seems to have an impact on people. I think that's where the message kind of gets across a little bit, and that's what people have been impressed with. But I think the other thing is that Alison and I often say we have won lots of awards, and we've kind of been all over the place and talked about Love Barrow Families, and yet within Cumbria it's been really tricky. So it's always, maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't always talk about the awards and things that we've won, because we have lots of contacts and lots of friends. I noticed Yad's here. We have lots of people that we're in contact with across the country, but it has been a difficult journey within Cumbria.
We're saying about being homegrown, don't we? Cumbria don't seem to recognise homegrown. We have to go elsewhere. To Europe and across the world.
Yeah. And it's good to talk about. It is, I like going and I like doing things like this, and I like doing the presentations because it's a reminder. When you're steeped in it, working day to day, you can forget. Sometimes I look back and I just think, wow, how did we manage to do that? It's amazing.
Can I come in and ask a question? Is that okay? I just want to say that I've really enjoyed this evening. Thank you, Trina and Alison. Nice to meet you. I've got kind of two hats because I'm at Lancaster University and our students go to Love Barrow and absolutely love the placement. So there's testament to not just the families that you work with, but the students that you support. But also, as you know, Trina, I went on Clark's training not so long ago, the attachment psychopathology training, and I'd really love to introduce it to the work that we do in New Beginnings in Stockport. But the adult attachment interview training isn't until next year, and I wonder, have you got any advice for how we can use the philosophy of the DMM in our practice now?
You've done the A&P?
Yes.
Did you say? Yeah. So is that giving you some kind of philosophical basis to?
Well, I'm starting to speak your language, Trina. That's what you said when I said I was going on it. You went, Yad will be able to speak the same language, yeah. And I get you now. And that's, I know. I've got Clark's book, which I find absolutely fascinating, and I had a team meeting yesterday actually, and told my team about the training, because we're in a similar position in that we too have seconded staff into our organisation, and we work with families in a way that is more organic in that they tell us. So one of our peer mentors ran group today, and I was in the background as they created a community for our new parents that have joined us, and it was just so powerful because I wasn't the leader, and I could hear the parents going, I know there's a professional here, but this is so good that we can sit and talk. And I suppose it's a question, not a story of our story. I just want some advice really. How do you think we should begin?
I wonder if it's worth thinking about the staff team having adult attachment interviews.
Okay.
That might be something that's worth thinking about. I mean, the other thing is there's the training that Pat's doing for us at the moment. It's for ourselves and another, I think it's 4 or 5 projects that are using the DMM, similar projects. in the country, and I think that's creating connections between people. So connecting into some of those things might be useful.
Okay.
And you can always ring me, talk to me if you want to.
I will.
Yeah,
I will.
And
Thanks.
I think it is difficult with the AAI because it's complicated, isn't it? So until you do it, it's another penny drops, I suppose, another few pennies drop when you do it. So the AAC distinction, I guess, is the biggest thing to think about, isn't it? And the high A's and what that looks like sometimes, you know, with parents. I think that's when I first did the AAI training, I didn't really get it, but that's what I learned. I learned that many of the children who cause trouble in schools and drive people mad are high A's. And so I think sometimes just having that thought is useful.
Okay, thanks, Trina. I'll be in touch. And thanks for this evening.
If there aren't any more questions now, I think it's fair to say, Trina, you're a member of the community.
Yeah.
Alison, you're not yet a member, but I'm sure you will become one at some point. So I guess if people do have further questions, they can find you in the community space, or perhaps post them and we can direct them to you if need be.
You can always contact us via the Barrow Families website. That's another option.
So once again, thank you both so much. I think it was fascinating to hear about the DMM in practice, about the amazing work you're doing. So it was really interesting talking to you, and thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll have you back at some point to talk further about all of the interesting things you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.